city lights all I can't figure out how somebody with city lights all around and uncorrectable double vision and no telescope somehow got into astronomy, but I did. And eventually I had a paper route, and the older members of the audience will remember what that is. Don't think those exist anymore. And I think some of you may remember the back page of Sky and Telescope every month would have a Unitron ad. It was usually the Unitron 114, the 2.4-inch refractor. And the proceeds of said paper route led to that telescope, which I still have. And I wound up eventually doing most of the drawings for Turn Left at Orion with that telescope for the first edition. Anyway, I always thought I'd be an astrophysicist. Loved the physics, loved the math, but also liked things tangible. And for me, stargazing is just such a passion. I was kind of worried that the profession and the passion amateur might interfere. So I learned that there's this thing called geophysics, where you can do a lot of the same sort of stuff, but when you do calculations or numerical or analog modeling, you can actually then go out and touch the thing you modeled. So that's what I got into. Mostly tectonics, what I call the study of things that go bump in the crust. And so I did a little bit of work on the driving forces of plate tectonics, mostly on the mechanics of mountain belts, why they are, where they are, how big they are, what kind of faults are in them, what directions they go, why they are or not seismic, things like that. And also discovered that you can use geophysics in arms control, monitoring nuclear tests and giving various countries that are wondering about joining test bans some confidence that their adversaries aren't cheating and things like that. But do all that and still be a stargazer. So I wound up faculty member at Stony Brook, wonderful state university with a lot of kids were kind of like I was when I started out. I had neither of my parents graduated from high school, and so there were a lot of kids from that sort of background, and so it was fun teaching and a great place to do research. So in the interim, when I was in grad school, I was working with my advisor, Sean Solomon, who wound up, some of you may know of, if you've heard of him, it may have been not his primary field geophysics, but when he was chief scientist for the Mercury Messenger mission. But anyway, long before that, we're in this seminar and suddenly this person appears there. And I thought, who is this? And turned out to be Guy. And we quickly became good friends, to the point that when he was thinking about joining the Jesuits, he's very Jesuitical about it, shall we say? Very, very methodical, intellectual, rational, and all that. So he was looking for, any reasons, he was doing his research for any reasons against his vocation. And he knew I'd be totally useless because I was totally rooting. I mean, I knew probably better than he did what was the right thing for him to do. So anyway, he was staying at our house a lot. My mother-in-law, to her dying day, swore that the reason Guy became a Jesuit was that he spent so much time in our house when we had 2 young children, and he thought, doesn't want that in his life. But the real reasons were, the right ones. So anyway, knowing I'd be useless, he took my wife out to dinner, and this wonderful story. They went out to this restaurant. He took my wife out to dinner at this wonderful restaurant in Stony Brook, and there they were with this very intense conversation about a lot of personal things, and we wanted her perspective. And leaning across the table, quietly conversing, when I was junior faculty member at the time, some senior members of my department walked in, and we kind of have to wonder what they thought. I kind of doubt they immediately guessed it was talking about a vocation to become a Jesuit. But anyway, when it came time to head off, Guy no longer had a car, so I wound up driving him from our home. I remember the date very well. It was August 16th, 1989. Remember it not only because it was wonderful to see my friend off, but also for a reason I will never, ever let Guy forget. As long as we live, I will not let him forget the fact that that night there was an absolutely glorious total lunar eclipse. And all I got to see of it was a little glimpse from a toll booth on the New Jersey Turnpike. So that was my my personal sacrifice for his vacation. He will never be allowed to forget it. Anyway, so that's that's how I came to know Guy. And as you mentioned, Guy and I were just at Astronomical League convention. That was when we were talking about the idea of our doing a tag team talk. I thought, who has a convention in Baton Rouge in July? It's like, really? Why don't they just do it in Boston in February? It just made no sense whatsoever. But it was a lot of fun. You'd mentioned Bob, you'd mentioned the time you were at Alcon a number of years ago. Well, in this case, we got to go to LIGO, which was an absolute blast.
Okay, jealous.
Yes, they do it. It's obviously an
Wow.
amazing facility, but they also do it up well for visitors. I was really, really impressed by it. And then the local astronomy club, Baton Rouge, that's BRAC. What do they call themselves? Baton Rouge Astronomical Society, BRAS. They have this amazing observatory. They have an 11.5-inch Alvin Clark refractor. Ouch, that is gorgeous. I mean, it's almost as beautiful to look at as through. And in a very big facility, they do some radio stuff. They're in collaboration with LSU and the local parks department, and they do a wonderful job. And so the meeting was great. Guy and I gave sort of our tag team talk, and when you've known somebody for 40 years, you sort of know all the nice, gentle way to push their buttons and have fun with each other. It's still, we've had over 30 years with this book, and it's 5 editions later. The 4th edition was why I had the unusual distinction of being able to tell my then department chair and dean, oh yes, I've decided where I'm going to do my sabbatical at the Vatican. And that was a new one for them. And it was absolutely wonderful. It's I don't know your experience, but there's a sort of a dirty secret about geophysicists and astrophysicists, which is that we can be absolutely helpless in what people would think would be our element. So, you put a collection of minerals in front of me, and I would, unless they're part of the the Crayola 8 set of basic minerals, that's not what I do. I don't, I don't know them. Rock hounds, amateur rock hounds, mineral hunters can they know so vastly more than I do about identifying obscure minerals and so on. And astronomers are kind of the same way. When they observe, they're in some control room with computer screens in front of them. It could be some distance away from the telescope. They don't look through an eyepiece. They certainly don't go out and, identify the constellations and star hop to their object, right? So, Guy was sort of in that position, and when I first knew him, and he was heading off for Kenya in the Peace Corps. So I got all excited. Like, oh, okay. I basically dragged him into the city to get a little telescope small enough to fit in a backpack, a Celestron C90, for those of you who know what that is, a little 90 millimeter.
He still has that, doesn't he?
He still has it. And I still have my Unitron 114. Yep, he still has it. So I dragged him up to get that. And then I loaded up with, various reference materials. And of course, he was out in the middle of the nowhere in the equator, and list of the Orion deck of objects is not really what you need. You just want something straightforward to star hop to things and give you a sense of what you expect to see, and so on. So that's kind of what we set out to do with this book, and it's been just a wonderful adventure, because it has been and for me an entry into getting to know lots and lots of fun people. Because stargazers are people who are capable of being passionate about something worth being passionate about. So my perspective on Guy is, I think, different than a lot of you guys.
I'll have to say I agree that about astronomers. I know a lot of them here in Michigan, and they are all passionate about it. And one of the things that I know a lot of them are missing is doing outreach events because of COVID, and I'm trying to get them to go out and do outreach events again, and a lot of them are very hesitant. And here I have COVID, so this is why.
You're not a good advertisement for your
No. But yeah, I met Brother Guy in the mid '80s at a science fiction convention. He was giving a talk about the Vatican Observatory, obviously, and he was curator of meteorites at that time, and he was giving a talk about the science of meteoritics. And I'd been collecting meteorites for about 2 years just as a hobbyist, and I walked away with a completely different appreciation for what I was collecting and how cool they were.
Yeah. So this conference, it's interesting. I didn't know what to make of it beforehand. I wasn't quite sure of the scale or whatever, and it's varied in size over the years. I think COVID and people being afraid of Baton Rouge in the summer may have cut into the numbers a bit. Guy and I had a lot of fun with our presentation, but the thing that was really memorable was a friend of the observatory and a good friend of Guy's, David Levy. As most of you kind of know him as the amateur astronomer who is an incredible comet finder, 24 comets or something, including, of course, SL9 that impacted Jupiter. But he's also, his training is in English literature, and I don't know how many of you know it, but not too long ago, some time ago, he lost his wife Wendy, and that is very much obviously with him right now. But he gave a talk that was just, one of the people sitting next to me said, this was a talk that got his left brain, his right brain, and his heart. And David can do that. His graduate work was in Shakespeare and Elizabethan poets, but he's also done stuff with the Jesuit, Gerard Manley Hopkins. He's extraordinary guy, with ideal speaker. Guy at the end of David's talk, Guy turned to me and said, "We got to go after that." But it was absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, David Levy, he attends online the meetings of the Warren Astronomical Society, and we are just honored to have him. And he every time after we give the officer reports, we give him a couple minutes because he always reads a poem. And several times he sticks around and just listens to our talks, and that's really cool to have him.
Yeah, he's a wonderful guy, and it's always good to see him, and also see him with Guy, because they go back a very long way as well.
Finding that Guy goes back a long way with a lot of people. Like when we talked with Heidi Hamill, found out that he met her in theater at MIT. I'm like, what? Oh my goodness.
I think I remember the play. I think it was when they did Fiddler on the Roof, and Guy, of course, played the rabbi.
Yep.
So it was just absolutely perfect in it. Yes, I attended that very play.
You mentioned the Astronomical League. I was at the Alcon in 2012, which was in Chicago during the heat wave, where the asphalt was melting under your feet. But yeah, I've got pictures of my wife next to a gigantic meteorite at the Field Museum, and there was David Eicher gave a talk at the planetarium there, so that was really cool. But I got to meet a fellow who was doing asteroid follow-up research, and that was pretty cool. And somebody said, "So, are you a professional then?" The guy's like, "Well, I haven't been, but I just got a NASA grant, so I'm getting paid by NASA, so I guess I am now."
Yeah, that works.
So this Alcon, I know they had an online, you could attend it online, and I was up north at the time, so I was unable to. Any interesting speakers at it? Did you see any of the lectures at all?
Are you talking about the current one?
Yeah, the last one.
Well, Guy and I certainly had fun with ours, and David was amazing. There were a bunch of them, but one that really amazed me was from a grad student. I'm going to blank on her name, from UC Santa Cruz, but she's an astronomy grad student, but she is from Kosovo, and a number of years ago, she somehow got it together to pressure the government to help out with some startup funds, and created talk about outreach, a small observatory and planetarium, the first in that country. And she was talking about the whole process of getting the thing going. And, there's something about astronomy that has it so that people are really very generous and forthcoming. Celestron heard about everything that they were doing, and arranged for a C-14 to make its way to Kosovo.
Ooh.
Donated. It's just extraordinary. It kind of reminded me. I mean, her story was just amazing, with just overcoming the logistics, and not the least of which is getting people were providing all sorts of materials for displays and for whatever, for outreach, but it all had to be translated into Albanian.
Oh my.
Yes, but her experience with Celestron and some other people who've been, really forthcoming and gotten the point of what she's doing reminded me of what happened when Guy and I went to Australia to do some of the drawings for the expanded later versions of Turn Left at Orion, where originally it had 4 seasons, and it was meant for small telescopes. We used mostly my 2.4-inch refractor, but occasionally Guy's little C90 that and that was great. But then time came along, and over time, Dobsonians came in. Yep.
That's what I got.
For very modest cost, you can get sizable light bucket. So we decided that oh darn, I would have to go out with an 8 or 10-inch daub and do all
Oh,
sorts of other drawings and visit all my favorite objects and draw them. And oh darn, we really needed to extend to the southern hemisphere, so we needed to go to Australia. Well, lo and behold, we head down there. It's always very useful to travel with a Jesuit, by the way, because there was this retreat house in South Australia, about a couple of hours north of Adelaide, in very dark skies. And not only did we get to stay there, but on cloudy nights, there was an additional benefit. It was both a retreat house and a vineyard, and they'd originally started early in the 20th century, I think, making sacramental wine, and then they realized it was far too good. So they started selling it and using only a fraction of the proceeds to buy sacramental wine to be sacramental wine. But anyway, so there were certain compensations on cloudy nights. But anyway, we needed a daub, and you can transport a C90 to Australia. You're not going to bring an 8 or 10-inch daub, right? So Guy contacted the biggest telescope seller in Australia, and explained what we wanted to do, and asked whether he could arrange to buy a daub to be shipped to this place, Seven Hill, in South Australia. He got a reply: I refuse to sell you a telescope. I will, however, donate it if you are okay with my putting on it a plaque honoring my favorite teacher. I was educated by Jesuits, and this particular Jesuit priest basically changed my life. So as long as you allow me to plaque.
let me think.
So it was absolutely wonderful. So we used a telescope that was delivered by somebody who for whom it was really meaningful.
That is very nice. Was it an 8 or a 10-inch?
It was an 8-inch.
8-inch. That's what I have.
And
it's still a considerable light bucket.
Oh, it is. And frankly, for my purpose, you wouldn't have wanted bigger, because an 8-inch under those skies, if you put a 10-inch under those skies, you're starting to get to things that most people in suburbia can't access. But it was just a wonderful story. And this young woman's story about her experiences in Kosovo, logistically, and the generous, open nature of people in related to astronomy. It's really struck a chord with me.
That is pretty cool. I remember I brought my 8-inch daub to an astronomy event years ago, and somebody had a beer can eyepiece. This eyepiece is literally the size of a beer can, and I'd never had one on my scope before. He's like, "Come here," and he puts it in my scope, and I put my eye up to it, and it felt like the thing wrapped around my face and sucked it into the scope. I literally drew back and went, "Oh my gosh!" And but I will be buying one of those with my next scope. I'm upgrading my 8-inch.
Well, when I started out, even good eyepieces were a bit like looking through a straw. I mean, a 40-degree field of view was standard. They now have 100 to 110-degree field of view. You're basically taking a spacewalk. I've got a favorite place I like to go. There's a dark sky park in Pennsylvania called Cherry Springs. And, it's the kind of place where it's a long drive, but when you are approaching it, suddenly your whole mental attitude changes. What you're going to be seeing is going to be spectacular, but also the people you're going to be interacting with, because there's definitely something self-selecting about it. Occasionally something happens that puts me in some of my attitudes in perspective. My favorite time was, I was determined to get some dim globular clusters that just barely hug the horizon there, that I could never see from home. So I had my list out of, do this first, and that, and that, and I'm gonna, and I was maybe a little too mission focused. So I there with my star charts, my little lamp, red lamp facing down, because everything is red light there, with my star charts, and two young people come up, and it's like, okay, I'll make nice, I'll be nice, whatever. But I really want to do my thing. And they seemed very sweet. But she kept on putting her hand on my star chart. What's going on here? It was always her left hand, right under the light. And then I asked, so what's going on? And she said, well, and she, mentioned pointed to the young man next to her, that he invited me out to go camping under the stars, because we don't get to see the sky that much. And well, 5 minutes ago he proposed, and I'm trying to see my ring.
And your light's not helping.
Yeah, well, it was good enough. He held it up, and at that point, of course, I said, "Okay, forget my plan," and I immediately took them to Saturn to see the rings, and then to the Ring Nebula, and then I said, "Okay, come back in about an hour, and I'll show you the Bridal Veil Nebula." And it just they wound up, they were all thrilled and very thankful and all that, but I realized they'd done me a real favor, getting me out of a zone.
Well, Saturn is always a good choice. I've had a very extreme reaction by showing Saturn when I was set up at a science fiction convention. This young lady literally flipped out. I mean, she drew her head back, gasped, looked at my scope again, then went back into the lobby of the hotel, and I heard her screaming as she's running down the aisle there, saying, "You got to go check out Saturn, this guy's telescope." I'm like, okay, well, I guess I made an impression on her, but it was, the rings were like that. It was quite
Yeah.
spectacular.
The other reaction I've gotten is when people look at it, and then they look in the other end of the telescope to see where I've suspended the thing. Yes.
People say that's not real. I just go doink on the scope, and the image does that. And
Yes. Oh.
like,
Yeah.
like what? You think I'm projecting this to scam you or something?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very, very common reaction. It's wonderful.
I was at a convention, and I was set up looking at the moon, beautiful Terminator, a quarter moon, right? And this apparently it was prom night, because there was all these beautifully dressed people going into the convention hotel, and I called this young couple over and had them look through my scope, and I had a close up of some craters, and she's like, "That's really cool. How'd those get there?" I'm like, how do I explain hypervelocity asteroid impact and crater morphology? Asteroid impacts. And that was enough, but yikes.
Big rocks.
Big
Yes.
rocks going very fast. So yeah, I've I was at a convention setting up my scope, and a young lady was in a car watching me. "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Setting up my telescope, look at the moon. Can I?" I'm like, "Please." And she looked at it and gasped, and I'm like, how come, you didn't get that gasp in school? Why'd you have to go to a random hotel to get that gasp? But I wish schools would do more astronomy. Sigh, that's always been a beef of mine.
There was just a message recently. Amateur astronomy groups have moved into electronically assisted astronomy,
Hmm.
by stackers and monitors. Have I gone this route too? Almost without exception, no. I'm a little bit of a cranky old time star hopper, to the point where I even obviously for outreach you don't star hop to things, but I think there's something visceral about being at the eyepiece. Where the closest I've really come recently is if you've got a bunch of people and you can have a camera on something, particularly the moon, and then you can have the monitor showing
Or projector.
or yeah, whatever. And but that's that's obviously a way you can go with this. I'm amused. Larry Lebowski has me beat by almost a decade. The known guy for 51 years.
Yikes.
Yikes, exactly.
I remember having a conversation with Guy when I'm talking about all these different astrophysicists I follow on Twitter, and he's like, back in the day when I was getting my PhD, he said I knew everyone in the field, and that is just not the case anymore. There's just so many. Well, just look at exoplanets themselves. All these exoplanet researchers and this. All of the research I've seen on the black hole telescope and stuff like that, there's like 50 to 60 authors on it. It's crazy.
Yes. Well, that had an interesting implication for me. I served a couple of terms as department chair, and we had wonderful people in planetary science coming up for tenure. And the situation is, if you're really good, then they want you on NASA mission teams, right? You want the best people on it. But if there is a publication related to one of the Mars rovers, you'll be one of 40 authors on it. And it's a cultural thing to explain to poets and philosophers on the tenure promotion and tenure committee that it's, oh, hello there, that this is a normal thing. Who is, and what's your name?
That's Icarus, and she just climbed up my leg. She crawled across the floor from across the basement to see me. Hi, baby. That's my daughter's bird, but she's an absolute sweetheart. She'll just let you do this all day. But I wasn't expecting you over here.
Icarus is a great name.
This is a green cheek conure, sweetest bird ever.
Don't fly too high.
So I want to post a link. You won't let me have my finger back, will you? I want to post a link in chat here. I found something interesting on Twitter the other day. A fellow used Blender, which is a 3D modeling package, and he used Gaia data, and he mapped the local part of the Milky Way using Gaia data at different resolutions out, and it's amazing. You can see star densities. You can actually see the star clouds and dust around us. It's just amazing. If you're on Twitter, it's called this galaxy map. But as soon as this one lets me, I will post that link.
Yeah, please do.
But I one of the with the Voss's topic being big data and machine analysis, I just keep seeing more and more and more of that. Those astronomical surveys are just generating ginormous amounts of data, and it's not going down. And I'm doing this I'm creating a presentation on exoplanets, and that number is only going to keep going up. And I love my mother-in-law. I walk upstairs to fill my coffee up, and she's watching some space program talking about there being as many rogue planets in the galaxy as there are stars. I'm like, oh, okay, I can put that in my exoplanet lecture.
But one of the things that's been the case with the size of data sets these days is that a lot of the biases are being taken out of the data. When in the past, if you were to make a map of stars out to 100 light years or something, it would miss all of the populous, very numerous dimmer objects. It's only relatively recently that the catalogs are getting, you've seen cataloging things deep enough and dim enough to get a really more.
Well, the other problem is like the Black Hole Telescope. I saw a Twitter post of them about the next data set, and they had literally a pallet stacked like 4 feet high with hard drives of data that were being shipped by boat to the processing center because the internet's not fast enough. That's that's almost insulting. Come on, internet, you need to be faster. And one would think that would drive the speed of the internet up a bit.
Yeah.
So galaxy map, there it is. I am posting the Twitter thing here. Yeah, this is pretty cool. And these images are zoomable, and there's several different. There it is on Twitter. And this data is just amazing. And there's the website. So I spent a full half hour looking at these, just being amazed. But he poured all this thing through Blender, which is not what I was expecting somebody to do. So, and then this is the same thing that Bob Mackey was using to create these models of St. Ignatius, I think it's St. Ignatius Church, with the Secchi's dome on top. So I did not know you could do that with Blender. So, hey, I have a question. If anybody here knows anybody on the Gaia mission, I would like to speak with them. I would like to have them give a presentation to the Warren Astronomical Society. So if you know anybody, they can contact me in chat. So Dan, is there a new version of Turn Left coming out?
Well,
Is there an update online version?
well, there's always a little bit of a bit of diplomacy that goes on dealing with a publisher, and particularly when the authors are enthusiasts rather than people who are really actually planning on like making a living, focused on making money off the book, because we've always wanted to do things to make it more accessible. It wasn't until the thing really started selling that we finally got them to do obvious things like allow spiral binding so it can be open at the telescope.
That is really nice, by the way. Brother Guy pointed that out, that you can just lay it flat on your car hood now.
Yeah.
And that's actually, I've seen people do that all the time with that spiral binding.
And when they tried it with the regular binding, it did not help the life expectancy of the book. The other thing that we've succeeded with them in is basically making all of the charts and drawings that are the core of the book available online. And our argument for that was that if you think about it, you could be observing in either of two hemispheres. You could be observing with a finder scope that does or does not rectify, or in a Catter refractor versus a Dob, which flips differently. The image, right? The image appears in different orientations. And of course, between a larger Dob and a smaller cat, you see different things. So there are all these permutations. So what we got them to do was to allow us to have a website so that anybody, if they don't have, they're not in the location or don't have exactly the equipment that we primarily chose, they can just go online and print up their own versions of the finder charts and telescopes and things. We always have, ideas of things, we want to do with it. And, in recent years, Cambridge has been a lot more forthcoming since, the book keeps selling. So they're they're reasonably willing. My main attention now is on something that goes back to something a little more personal for me, which is, I started out in a city with this wonderful refractor, and there's not a lot of deep sky objects you're going to see from beneath streetlights. So the moon was really big for me. And it was a big part of my, not only developing interests in astronomy or continuing it, but also getting interested in geology. It wound up being my profession. And so the moon, people think of it stargazers think of the moon as the enemy, right? This time of the month, beautiful, clear sky, and I can't stargaze because the enemy is out. But in reality, day by day and hour by hour, it is a different object with different sun angles. And there's a lot of geology you can see there. So the thing I'm really more focused on now is really so going back to my beginnings with it, and in discussion with Cambridge about something I'm referring to as the nearest rock. Basically, if you will, a turn left to Trunculatus, but a geologist's eye view of the moon in the sky.
You mentioned at the start that part of your research dealt with plate tectonics. What did you think when you heard that there's a possibility of ice plate tectonics on Europa?
Oh, it's wonderful. In fact, as soon as the first images came back many years ago, I was very intrigued by it. There are some obvious analogs, but there are some other ways in which it is different. It has to be different. The mechanics, part of the mechanics has to be different, just because so much of it on Earth is driven by the negative buoyancy of the downgoing slab, which in most of that negative buoyancy comes from the fact that it's a lot colder than the surroundings. It turns out, in terms of ways of moving heat, conduction stinks. Conduction is really bad. It's great for short distances, but the time scale goes, but essentially by the square of the length scale. So even though it may take millions of years for slab to get down into the mantle, it has not cooled anywhere near to and anywhere close to equilibrium with its surroundings. And it's being cooler, it's denser, and that's something that isn't going to happen with ice tectonics. You're not going to have an icy crust be substantially denser than the slush / water that it would
So
be.
I would expect you'd see a lot of mountainous formations because of any ice plates moving around and smashing into each other.
You get at extension, you get some very distinctive features that have some analogies with mid-ocean ridges on the Earth, but the compression just looks very different, and a lot of my research had to do with what happens with the really big compressional belts on the Earth, which is why I would do field work in Pakistan, because it's very much like what was happening in Pennsylvania a few 100 million years ago with the collision of Africa.
Are there any other bodies in the solar system other than Earth and Europa that are showing plate tectonics?
There's proper plate tectonics. As a purist, I wouldn't even say Europa. It has its own kind of similar. To me, maybe the most interesting case is Venus, and I've got my own somewhat weird ideas about it. You'd think, one of the big issues with plate tectonics is you've got driving forces, either gravitational driving forces due to the mid-ocean ridges being elevated, and they're elevated because of the thermal structure. The pulling of due to the negative buoyancy of the slab, but all that motion means there has to be relative horizontal motion. There's this zone called the asthenosphere, where the mantle is relatively easily deformed, and it's weaker than what's beneath it, even though it's cooler than what's beneath it. And the reason is the wonderful effects of water. The melting temperature of rocks are very sensitive to tiny amount of water content, and you have this fight between the amount of water, the temperature, and also the pressure. And there's this sweet spot where it's not molten, but it's relatively weak. We call that the asthenosphere, and that's what allows plates to move laterally. Well, Venus is hotter, so it should be weaker there. But no, Venus is incredibly dry. And the lack of that tiny fraction of a percent of water in mineral structure makes hundreds of degrees difference in the melting temperature, and therefore the fractional melting temperature, the homologous temperature, the fraction of melting temperature you're at, and the strength is affected to the point where, ironically, even though it's warmer, it's harder to make a plate move horizontally on Venus. So that's why you have these amazing structures like Artemis Chasma and so on that are spectacular on up to a certain scale, but you never get, something like the Pacific Plate or Eurasian Plate or anything on that sort of a scale, because there's enough resistance on the basal traction that when you integrate it along the length of a big plate, it would be bigger than any forces that would drive it.
It's very cool. All right, it's 11:56. We've got 4 minutes left. Does anybody have a question for Dan? Any questions? Oh, Joel, before I forget, I wanted to get with you. If you want to get with me later, a fellow gave a presentation to the Warren Astronomical Society about electrically assisted observing, and I know somebody that does it actively, so I can get you some information on that.
That would be great. Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, I can get you that information. So Dan, anything else you want to share with the group? How about a brother guy anecdote nobody else has heard?
These really have to be filtered. So okay, there's there was my wife and I, I'm gonna say suffered through, that isn't quite the term, experienced some of Guy's girlfriends, and before the day, and one of them, they're all very nice people, but one of them was a very talented artist, but her tastes were into sweet little critters, and where so Guy asked her to do some drawings for the book where you before you get to the telescope view and the finderscope view and the naked eye view, each chapter has a broad sky view for that season. So you start going, and along the horizon you need things, and he diplomatically felt he was constrained on trying to push my wish to tone down the little fraggles and cutie critters. So anyway, we had this back and forth, and I kind of tolerated it. When that girlfriend was history, it became possible to get rid of these critters. So we had another artist, and I said, "Oh, thank God, no cutie critters." Well, Guy and the do artist,
Mary Lynn?
What's that? Yeah. They decided to pull one on me, and on the front cover of the next edition, there's this wonderful scene with a father and daughter in silhouette of the telescope, Orion in the sky, and way down in the corner was a little wascally wabbit. And I never knew about it until the book came out. And okay, you got me. Well, the next edition, there was the rabbit and 2 baby rabbits. So he got me on that. But yes, so that was just one of the bits of fallout of our experiencing some of Guy's pre-Jesuitical life.
That is hilarious. All right. Well, we're coming up on 1 o'clock. Thank you very much, Dan. I appreciate this very much. And everyone, we'll see you in a month at the next full moon. Clear skies, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dan. Oh yeah, there you go. Oh, everybody's holding up the mine back on the shelf. Sorry. Oops.
Bye, Chris. Don't fly too high.
She's a cutie.
My kittens aren't here. They'd get very excited.
This one likes to be held like an ice cream cone. It's hilarious right there. There you go. Alrighty, I'll
All right,
see you
take
later.
care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you later. And